I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander. And today we'd like to talk to you for a few moments about the essence of time. Time is such a tremendous commodity in all of our lives, and how we spend our time determines to a great extent the quality of our life. I guess very often most of us don't think about time except when we run out of it.
Yes, or we complain because we don't have enough time when actually the problem is we're not budgeting our time the way we might. And we can all look at our own lives and see how we've been our own worst enemy in that respect.
It seems to me that as I look at my life and the lives of those with whom I have contact and counsel, uh, we really don't think much about budgeting our time.
Hmm.
Many of us don't think much about budgeting our funds, but we certainly don't budget our time. And that is really a sad situation and a sad commentary because, of course, where we devote our time in our lives is really where our heart is
Yeah,
and where our life is.
that's right. Someone said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also, or vice versa. And that's very true. And very often we need to budget our time for our own inner growth and our own inner expansion and peace of mind. And if we do, then everything else falls into place better. So we need to budget a certain amount of time in the morning for introspection and for reflection and meditation and prayer. And then we need to have a time in the evening for retrospection. And if we do, everything flows ever so much better. And I'd like to suggest to our listeners, if they don't do that, to just sit for a moment in meditation, prayer and meditation. And praying is just thanking God. Well, the way we would do it would be to thank God in the morning for all our blessings and ask God's blessing on whomever or whatever circumstance we wish to. And then just go into the meditative state, even just a moment. You know, at the Edgar Cayce Foundation in Virginia Beach, Virginia, they discovered that 30 seconds of meditation changed the endorphin level in the human body. Isn't that interesting?
It's a tremendous way to begin the day.
Yes.
And also, I think many people don't think about taking, when we say prayer,
Uh-huh.
they think that it's more of a time when we'd set aside a few moments and recite something. And in fact, what we're talking about is something much more contemplative, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we can be grateful. I think we need to, gratitude goes a long way, a little gratitude. And so we can just express our gratitude to God and ask for God's blessing on those persons who come to our mind. I know one morning I awakened about a half hour, an hour earlier than usual. And I thought, well, this means I'm supposed to pray for someone. So I prayed for the first person who came to mind, which was a young mother who was expecting her twin babies. And then those babies were born that day by C-section.
Uh-huh.
And when her sister-in-law called and told me that the babies had been born, I said, what time? Because I thought it must have been the time I had awakened. And it wasn't. It was 2 hours later. And I said, oh, I awakened 2 hours exactly before that. And I thought, and I was impressed to pray for her and the babies. And so she said, and so her sister-in-law said, well, that's when they decided they needed to take the babies because her situation was so bad of toxic poison, toxemia. And so I was really grateful that I'd awakened, that my guardian angel or whoever had awakened me, and I was able to pray for her because we know that prayer goes out as light, and it really helps. So when we waken in the morning, we can pray. Even an umbrella blanket prayer will make a lot of difference in the lives of people.
And it sets up the spirit in which we spend our time.
That's right. That's right. So we need to budget our time for our own inner needs, and then we need to budget time for ourselves. And a lot of people think they're being selfish if they take too much time for themselves. Well, we need time for ourselves, and we need to treat ourselves as nicely as we do our friends and acquaintances. So that's part of the way we need to budget our time. And the essence of time is we have all the time in the world, but it's how we spend that time that matters. And a lot of people in our American work ethic way, we have negated the importance of just daydreaming, just time to be. But we need to spend more time like that and allow our children to have time like that. And allow others to have time like that.
Taking time to dream, time to
Right.
meditate, time to reflect,
Yes.
time to simply take a couple of deep breaths.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of the things that our mothers always told us is when we're angry or upset is to take a deep breath or to count to 10. But simply by taking a few moments, as you said, for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
we have a tremendous ability to center ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and to use just a few seconds or a few minutes of time in such a magnificent and prudent
Mm-hmm.
fashion.
Mm-hmm. And when we do, it's an investment, because then we're more able to go through the day and to glide through the day instead of lurch through the day. Isn't that true?
It is very true. And we do so often go through our days being consumed
Mm-hmm.
by our work time and our family obligations and maybe social activities, and without much thought
Mm-hmm.
of the fact that we do have, at least in our life cycle, this 24-hour period.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I learned years ago was that you have your life is divided into three segments, and you need to be able to relax,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to be able to work, and you need to be able to play.
Mm-hmm.
And those things have to happen. And if they don't happen, and if we don't lead a balanced life from the standpoint of the utilization of our time, then we really do come out at the end of a day or a week or a month feeling very exhausted.
Yeah.
And so many people in today's environment are just totally exhausted, and
Mm-hmm.
they have the feeling that there isn't enough time.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't enough time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, part of that is that as we budget our time and we look at how we spend our time, there are decisions that have to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And if we fail to make decisions about our time and simply let circumstances and situations consume our time, then it's like an endless treadmill.
Mm-hmm. And when we're on that treadmill, we think we can't get off because we have all these goals for ourselves that we have to do this and have to do that and have to do the other thing. When in reality, we don't have to do half the things that we think we have to do,
Mhm.
because we can't just sit back and be objective enough to see what we need to cut out in our lives. And we can cut out things that we don't even miss, and people don't miss having us do them. But yet, when we free up our own time more fully, and I know you're very good about doing that, of taking the time you need to plan and to do what you need to do, and time for yourself. And I've learned it the hard way that I have to take time for myself. And I've seen people, and you have too, we've all seen people who have been like, years ago, people used to have to be in the sanitariums for lung tuberculosis. And I've heard more than one person say, the happiest time in my life was when I was in the sanitarium, where they'll say the san, because I learned just to be.
Mhm.
And those people probably, I wouldn't know, but probably were those who just were agitated all the time and had to be doing. And they learned that they didn't have to be doing. And then it affected the rest of their lives in a positive way.
Mhm.
So, and then there are people who have gotten sick, and in other ways, and maybe for a brief illness, because they just had to learn to slow down.
Tremendously important for us to
Mhm.
learn to slow down, and
Yeah.
tremendously important for us to learn to use our time wisely. And as you said, I'm a great person for modifying my schedule.
Mhm.
And I am not a workaholic.
Uh-huh.
I'm not overly dedicated. I'm not overly zealous. And it doesn't matter whether it's work or church or family. I have no problem at all failing people.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the problems that many of us get into, and that is that we're constantly trying to please people, and
That's
we're
right.
constantly trying to meet what we perceive to be our obligations,
Mhm.
when in fact we have few obligations.
Exactly.
And our first obligation is always to ourselves.
Yes.
And we need to understand that, and that's not a selfish comment. And the fact is that none of us are very useful if we're constantly worn to a frazzle,
Mhm.
if we're constantly failing to take care of ourselves.
Mhm.
Very often in my office, and much to the chagrin of my secretaries and people who help me, I'll have a very full day. And for the most part, I follow my schedules and I do what I need to do. But it's not uncommon for me at all to say, I'm simply not going to be around for the rest of the day. I have something to do, cancel everything, and I go and do what I need to do. And
Mhm.
sometimes going and doing what I need to do is to walk through the mall, or to go to Starbucks. And we're
Mhm.
not advertising Starbucks, but have a cup of coffee. And I don't have any problem with that, because one of the things that I learned a long time ago is that there's no value to stress in
Mhm.
one's life.
Mhm.
And if life becomes a stressful circumstance or situation, then identify how it is that you can spend your time that can bring you out of these stressful times. And that doesn't mean running away from everything.
Of
And
course,
certainly
of
it doesn't
course,
mean failing to meet obligations.
of course.
But it does mean being willing to give up the expectations that others have upon our time and understand that each of us is obligated and responsible for how we use our time.
And you can see that the people who are not capable of making those decisions and following through on them are the people who get into petty dissension and fights with others because their energy is too low and they don't have the patience because they don't have their bearing. They're not centered.
Right. And I think, too, as we get into the obligations that we feel we have, for instance, at our church center, you know, you and I and ministers and counselors, people can feel that they have many, many obligations to people, but it's not uncommon, as you know, going back to my own experience, if after a service, I just don't feel equal to dealing with circumstances and situations, I just go. And where the obligation would be to stay and to meet the people and to do, but if it doesn't, if the circumstance and situation is not right at the moment and at that time, I think it's important for us to understand how we use our time and whether we're willing to forfeit our time in some endeavor that is at high cost and great damage to ourselves. And if we make that sacrifice, then we need to accept the consequences.
Exactly. And if someone really needs our time after a service or after some event, then we know they would let us know in advance. So it's not that urgent. It's a whim. And we don't need to live on other people's whims. We can live on our own integrity of budgeting our time and budgeting our energies.
And it has to do with not being callous, but simply dealing with the realities of life. I can think of times in which we have had people who have been very ill or even dying in the church, and people have called upon me to come, and I was simply not able to come for whatever reason. And then that individual made their transition, and I was unable to be there at the time. Well, others were there, and I'm sure they were cared for, but very frequently some will say, well, isn't it awful that they waited for you and you weren't there? And that's, of course, an extreme issue, but the real essence of the message that I'm sharing is that I don't feel bad about that because my time is as it needs to be, and we can do what we can do and we can't do any more. And so often in life, people will do what they can to make us feel guilty. And one of the things that I work hard at is not allowing people to make me feel guilty. Now, there are some guilts that people have about time that are valid and that just kind of gnaw away at them. And one is the lack of time that people spend with their families. And so often in today's environment, it's not a male or female issue because men and women both work, but when the male and female partner, the mother or the father, both work and spend time at work and feel that they have to spend time at work and begin to rationalize and justify the fact that work pays the bills and I need to be at work, and do that at the sacrifice of time that needs to be spent with the family, then that guilt begins to gnaw at people, and they're really reminded that we do have personal obligations, and those personal obligations to those around us and those important to us really do need to be honored. Now, it doesn't mean at all times, but it means certainly in some instances.
Yes, and we have to remember, too, that we have to be realistic about that. Sometimes we put our own perception on it. I know a young couple who are divorced, and they're both very attentive to their child, and the child won a lot of honors at school. And so they said, why didn't you tell us that you were being honored that day? We would like to have been there. And he said, well, you didn't do that work. I did. He said, I needed to have the attention focused on me. He's only 10 years old. And so the parents were feeling guilty and bad because they were not there. And the child really didn't need them.
Very true, very true. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you an opportunity to receive some literature that will allow you to continue the study of New Thought teaching that we're sharing with you.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the New Thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a
to continue the study of New Thought teaching that we're sharing with you.
We We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through Confident Living.
Before the break, we were talking about the essence of time and the demands that people place upon our time. And I guess one of the things we could spend a few minutes talking about is exactly how we ought to prioritize our time.
Yes, well, first of all, we need to spend the time in introspection and attuning ourselves to the divine. And if we do that, everything else falls into place ever so much better. And then we have to know that we need to accept what life brings us. And whatever life brings us, we have to accept that and go along with it. And that we don't owe our lives, our time to other people. If it isn't feasible for us to give time to other people, then we can simply say no. We can learn to say no. And we can say, I'd like to do that, but I'm sorry, I can't. And we don't have to offer excuses. And that's another thing, that we don't owe all this to other people. We just have to say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And if we learn to do that, then we simplify our lives in that way.
And then we begin to have more time for ourselves.
Yes.
And we begin to be able to prioritize and budget and plan our time in an adequate fashion.
And if we don't, then we feel that we've not accomplished whatever we need to accomplish, regardless of what it is we do or don't do. We don't feel happy with life and with ourselves and our own activities. And another thing we have to always remember is that it's not a waste of time when we're just doing things purely for pleasure. That's not wasting time.
Absolutely true. And so many of us have been taught that that's not true at all. Also, it's not a waste of time to daydream.
Exactly.
And to allow the creative aspect of ourselves to come forward. It's not a waste of time to enter into some hobby or something that, especially hobbies, most hobbies are creative, and they reach down into us and allow us not only to relax and spend time doing things that we enjoy, but they also stimulate the creativity and the peacefulness of our being.
Exactly. And when we get our minds off the issues of the day and have a diversion, such as you're just describing, then that very diversion will allow us then to clear our minds, and we think more clearly about what we're going to accomplish. And we have proof of that from the scientific Edison and Tesla, and those scientists who brought through so much wonderful information, but they all took time to meditate and daydream.
And that daydreaming really brought a real essence of relaxation to them and stimulated creativity.
Yes.
And that's in so many instances where our lives are flat because we spend so much time doing the things that we think we're obligated to do, so that there's no creativity, there's no spark of life anymore.
Because we're just spinning our wheels in a sense, or like we're on a treadmill, instead of really taking time to evaluate and to see where we're going and what we're going to do, and to listen to the inner divine. And sometimes people are listening to the inner divine and they don't realize that's what they're doing, because they just think, I thought I dreamed something, or I thought of something. But we do need to consciously take time to do that. And when we do then, and receive that guidance and then follow the guidance, if we would do that, we'd be far happier human beings.
And one of the things that I've heard you say clearly in this program, and we've mentioned it several times, is the importance of taking time for reflection and prayer. And I think a lot of people don't do that because, first of all, it's not a habit that maybe many people have established in their life. And secondarily, they think it has something to do with religion. And one of the things that we know is that what we're talking about has nothing to do with the religion or faith tradition. People of any faith or people of no faith can benefit from this time of introspection, this time of quiet reflection and meditation. And of course, if we're of a religious tradition where we have a prayer modality. There are people who are very comfortable with a morning prayer and an evening prayer in a very ritualistic way. But for the average person, simply taking time to spend a few moments is just a tremendously wise use of time, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think those people who have a stylized prayer that they say, well, it sets the pace for them, and it helps them then to collect themselves and to go within. And so it's not the whole of their devotion or their quiet time or their daydreaming time. It sets the pace for it. It's the keynote. And then they're able then to relax and just flow with whatever is coming through them. And when we do that, then we're being creative. And we need to learn to be more creative in all our lives, in all our activities, and not to just be stolid. Because when we're stolid, we're not being creative and we're not moving forward. We're just sitting still.
And as we're creative, then we have new and different ways of utilizing our time, don't we?
Yes.
Whether it's at work or in a family situation or recreation or enjoyment, it's that creativity that contributes to our wise use of time.
Yes, and when we are creative, we're living from a different aspect of being, a different perception within ourselves than when we're not being creative. And that's what we need to honor. And as we honor our own divine within, then we are at peace. And we do know that time is, that we have all the time in the world to do what we need to do, and we'll do it. And what we don't get done is not that important. We can do it tomorrow.
And that's an important aspect,
Yes.
is that many things can wait.
Yes.
And many things should wait. And it's very important for us to reorder our lives in the budgeting process of our time. And some things simply need to be done at other times. And
Yes, and I'd like to encourage our audience to not feel guilty if they don't do whatever it is they don't do, because obviously it's not that important if they don't do it. And so unless they have obligations that they're not meeting, and we know when we're in that situation, but mostly we put constrictions on ourselves and on others. That it's just like my great-grandmother used to always have someone doing something all the time, and no one could sit still around her because she'd give them a chore to do, because she had that American work ethic so strongly ingrained in her that you don't waste time. And that went on for a really long time, didn't it? But that American work ethic, unfortunately, has not stayed as strong as it was.
that's true. And the idea that if we keep ourselves busy, then a part of that is if we keep ourselves busy, then we don't think.
Yeah.
And in fact, as we are less busy, we begin to think more. And actually what we want to do is to be thoughtful people. And for the process of new thought is the idea of being constantly aware of how our minds are operating and how we are acting and reacting to the circumstances and situations of life in our minds. And it's tremendously important that we have time to do that, time to identify the dynamic of how our mind is operating.
And as we do that, we're flowing with life itself, and we feel at one with all of creation, and we know that all is right in the world, as opposed to being hectic and harried.
And so many people spend all of their time hectic and harried.
Yes.
And really in that process, there is no peace.
That's right.
There is no peace. There is no tranquility. And there is no self-satisfaction. There is no satisfaction in life. And that's a sad commentary for many people's experience.
Yes. Well, sometimes we just expect too much of ourselves. We expect so much of ourselves in our lives that it's unrealistic. And I don't know why we would expect all these things that we don't get done, because if we don't get them done, we don't get them done. But we think that life is not really worthwhile unless we're doing great and wonderful things. Just to live peacefully and harmoniously is the answer, isn't it?
It is, to simply be.
Yes.
And to spend a few moments or some time simply being. And that is a tremendously wise use of time. And so many of us go through the 24 hours that we have in a day and we never are able to be. We're busy working and we're fulfilling obligations and doing laundry and paying bills and going to the grocery store and meeting the expectations of others, and we never, and then at the end of a 70 or 80 or 90-year lifetime, we wonder where it's gone.
Yes, yes. And sometimes that's what we need to have been doing. We need to be answering the needs of others, but usually We let the expectations of others get too strong a hold on our time, when actually people don't care that much. They ask us to let's do this or let's do that, but it doesn't matter that much to them, but we think it does. And so it's our perception, isn't it? We go through life on a perception, our own perception of every incident and every occurrence.
And that is constant. We're constantly perceiving.
Yes.
And we're constantly attempting either to meet our own expectations or the expectations of others. And so often in doing that, we are wasting and consuming time.
Yes. What we really need is to just be living each day to the best of our ability, meeting whatever comes our way, and doing it with grace and charm and without being too hectic or harried. And when we do that, we find that at the end of our lives, people who have lived that way are very content with what they've done. Where people who have gone scattering their energies throughout life are not content with what they've accomplished.
A tremendous concept that the individuals who are spending their time harried are scattering their energies, aren't they?
Yes.
And as we scatter our energies, we are then dissipating our life force in truth. And just as you said, those people who are serene and those people who are peaceful at the end are also people who were that throughout their lives.
Yes. It makes a big difference. As you know, I did hospice work, and I know you've done hospital work, and we've seen people in straitened circumstances. And we've seen that those people who have accepted life usually accept death in a very open and realistic way.
That's true. And people who are accepting of the circumstances and situations of life, accept the time that they have, and are accepting of the fact that when a time ends, and when a period ends, that's all right.
Yes. So they have a new phase to their life, and they see death not as an obstacle, not as an enemy, but just the next step.
And one of the things that we know in New Thought, and we teach so clearly, is that time continues on for us and life continues beyond the veil that we call death.
Yes.
And so we have plenty of time. We have lots of opportunities to utilize our time and our efforts. And it is important for us to budget our time and to use our time wisely. And Dr. Freelander and I hope that the information that we've shared with you has been useful as you live a confident life, and we look forward to seeing you next time.